The first scream was carried on the wind, thin as smoke, and by the time it reached the valley, it had already turned into a lullaby. They say the mountains remember everything, the footsteps, the blood, the promises. In Raven Hollow, where the ridges rise like broken teeth against the sky, memory clings to the air like mist. No phone signal, no streetlights, no reason for outsiders to come, except for the stories. Folks down in Harlan whisper them still, in the softest tones, like prayer and warning tangled together. They say there used to be a family up there who learned how to live without sunlight, and maybe without conscience. The year was 1983. The mines had gone silent, leaving only rust and hunger. A social worker named Clara Mayfield drove her county-issued Chevy up the gravel switchbacks to check on a missing welfare recipient. She left at 10:14 a.m., radioed dispatch once at 11:02, and was never heard from again. The sheriff said her tires probably slipped off the ridge, but the dogs, they say, wouldn't stop howling for 3 nights straight. 40 years later, a small documentary crew set out to retrace Clara's path. 4 of them, Eli Trent, sound man, Leah Voss, producer, film student twins Aaron and May, and the local fixer, old Roy Candler, who still walked with a limp from a coal shaft collapse back in '67. They weren't ghost hunters. They wanted a grant-winning story about rural neglect and forgotten families. But stories have a way of feeding on whoever tells them. Roy warned them early. Once you cross the dry creek, he said, keep your voices low. The Hollow don't like to be reminded it's still alive. He smiled when he said it, but his eyes didn't. The crew laughed, city bright and confident, their gear humming like modern talismans. Cameras, drones, shotgun mics. They believed documentation could tame superstition. The mountain, patient as old bone, let them believe it. By the time dusk bled through the trees, the forest had swallowed the road behind them. The air grew heavy, sweet with rot and wet leaves. Leah noted on her recorder, temperature drop, ambient noise 0. Even the crickets stopped. Silence thickened until it felt physical, pressing against skin. And then came a faint melody, soft, humming, almost tender. Roy froze mid-step. Don't answer, he whispered. It ain't for you. They made camp on a flat patch near the remnants of an old foundation, moss-covered stones forming a half circle. Aaron joked it looked like an altar. No one laughed. The fire smoked instead of burned, as if the air itself refused flame. Eli tested the microphones, catching strange low frequencies that pulsed like heartbeats under the static. Probably whined through the ravine, he said, though there was no wind. Later, as the fire dimmed, Roy told them about the McAllisters, the family that used to own the Hollow. He spoke softly, as if reciting from memory instead of imagination. There was a time after the mines closed, folks started disappearing. Hunters, surveyors, drifters. People said the McAllisters stayed fat while the rest starved. Sheriff called it moonshine trade, but the stills never smoked. When they finally raided the place in '69, the house was empty. Just a table set for 13 and a Bible with the pages glued together. May recorded every word, eyes wide. So what happened to them? She asked. Roy stared into the dark. Maybe they moved deeper. Maybe they learned the mountain's language. Either way, they ain't gone. The night deepened until even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Somewhere down the slope, water dripped rhythmically, slow, deliberate, like footsteps counting time. Eli adjusted his headphones, listening. There's something under us, he murmured. The ground felt hollow, faintly vibrating, as though the earth was breathing beneath their tents. In the early hours, May woke to faint light flickering through the woods, small, warm glows moving in a line far below. Lanterns, maybe, or eyes. She reached for her camera but stopped when she heard humming. Again, closer this time, layered voices in perfect harmony, singing a tune no radio ever played. For a moment, she thought it was beautiful. Then she realized it had no words, only the sound of mouths remembering hunger. By morning, the tracks around their camp were clear. Bare feet, small as children's, pressed deep into the mud. Dozens of them circling the tents. Leah's drone batteries were drained. Roy's compass spun uselessly, and the air smelled faintly of iron and smoke. Leah whispered while packing up. We should leave. Roy nodded slowly. Leaving's easy, he said. Finding your way out, that's the hard part. They started down the trail they thought was theirs, But the sun never quite rose, just a dull amber haze filtering through the mist. Every bend looked the same. Every sound came from behind them. The mountain rearranged itself, politely, like a host keeping guests for one more story. Somewhere between the first path and the second guess, Raven Hollow closed its mouth around them. Sometimes evil doesn't chase. It waits, kind as a cradle, until you walk willingly into its arms. The mountain doesn't need to hunt. People always come back. The morning light never felt like morning. It came filtered through mist, weak and colorless, as if the sun itself had forgotten this place. Dew clung to every blade of grass, silvering the ruins of the old foundation where they'd slept. May found a print near her tent, small, perfectly formed, toes splayed wide like a child's. But the ground around it was dry. Whatever left it hadn't pressed from above. It had pushed up from below. Roy stood apart, smoking in silence. The smoke curled wrong, drifting downward instead of up. "You sure this is the same road we came in on?" Leah asked, glancing at the GPS. The screen blinked, no signal. Eli adjusted his camera rig, forcing a grin. "We're fine. We'll hit the ridge by noon. Mountains just mess with compass readings." But the ridge never came. Every path bent back toward the hollow. The trees seemed to reposition themselves when they weren't looking. The moss always facing north no matter which direction they turned. The air thickened with a metallic taste, as though something unseen had started breathing alongside them. When Leah played back last night's audio, the hum was still there, faint, layered, pulsing at the same rhythm as a human heartbeat, and then faintly behind it a whisper, "Stay." They stopped moving. Roy's voice trembled when he finally spoke. "You hear that?" His eyes were on the slope below, where the brush shifted, slow and deliberate. For a moment, a figure appeared. A girl. No older than 10, pale as moonlight, her hair tangled with twigs. She stood still, watching. When Eli raised his camera, she vanished without sound. Only a trail of wet footprints led deeper into the trees. They followed, half in fear, half in curiosity, and the kind of fatal curiosity that makes people touch the flame just to see if it still burns. The trail wound toward the creek, where a cabin leaned against the hillside like it was too tired to stand. The roof sagged, and its windows were black as if something inside was waiting for its reflection. The air was colder here. No insects, no birds, just the steady tick of water dripping through the rusted gutters. Leah hesitated. "We shouldn't go in." Eli ignored her, pushing the door. It groaned like a throat clearing after a long silence. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of iron and damp wood. A dining table stood in the center, set with plates that had fused to the wood with decades of decay. Above them hung a string of what looked like dried herbs, until May noticed one wasn't a plant at all. It was a finger bone, polished smooth by touch. On the far wall, something was carved into the wood in uneven letters. "We feed the mountain so it don't feed on us." Leah's hands shook as she filmed. "This can't be real," she whispered. But the evidence was all around, a cradle in the corner, still rocking faintly though there was no wind. Jars sealed with wax lined up on a shelf, each holding something dark floating in amber liquid. The labels were faded, but one was still legible, Clara M. May backed away, covering her mouth. Roy touched the jar with trembling fingers. "They kept her," he said quietly, as if apologizing to the air. "Lord help them, they kept her." Eli found a staircase leading down, wooden steps damp with rot, vanishing into darkness. He pointed the flashlight. The beam didn't reach the bottom. The air that came up was warm, like breath. "There's something down there," he said, voice small. "Something alive." Roy's hand clamped on his shoulder. "No, you don't go where they went. That's where the hollow feeds. But curiosity is stronger than warnings, especially when fear disguises itself as courage." Eli took a step, then another. The boards creaked. Somewhere below, something creaked back. A slow answering sound. Perfectly in sync. May caught a glimpse before the light flickered. The walls below were moving, just slightly, like muscle under skin. They ran. The forest outside felt smaller now, the trees leaning closer, whispering as they passed. When they looked back, the cabin door had closed on its own. No wind, no visible force, just the quiet finality of something satisfied. Roy stumbled on the trail, gasping. We shouldn't have come here. They don't take kindly to remembrance. By dusk, the mist returned, thicker than before. It crept low along the ground, carrying a faint scent of meat and kerosene. The crew tried to set up camp again, but the air made their lighters sputter and die. May turned on her flashlight and froze. The beam caught dozens of small shapes just beyond the fog, faces pale and watching. Too still to be human, too human to be still. Leah whispered, "Who are they?" Roy swallowed. "That's what's left of them." The shapes began to move, and not toward them, but around them, circling, their bare feet whispering in the leaves. The humming started again, soft and layered, rising from every direction. The melody had no end, no beginning, only motion, like the hollow itself was breathing through them. No one spoke after that. The only sound was the camera still recording, the red light blinking steadily like a heartbeat. The night pressed down like a weight, thick with fog and something else, something that felt alive. The air had turned syrupy, full of the quiet hum that seemed to seep from the ground itself. The forest no longer felt like forest at all, but a lung exhaling softly, rhythmically, as if the earth beneath them was still breathing. Eli's camera light cut through the mist, but every time he turned it toward the trees, shapes melted back into the dark, figures that didn't quite vanish fast enough. The red recording light blinked on his chest, the only human color left in that gray world. May held his sleeve tightly. "It's watching us," she whispered. He didn't ask what it was. Somehow they both already knew. Roy was muttering prayers under his breath. His words stumbled out half in English, half in the old mountain dialect, syllables that sounded borrowed from another century. Leah tried the radio again, voice shaking. "Ranger Post, this is Voss, crew of 4. We're lost in Raven Hollow. Coordinates unknown. Please respond." Only static answered, layered with faint laughter, soft and childlike, threading through the interference. When the mist thinned, they saw the clearing, a round patch of earth at the base of a cliff, ringed with stones carved into spirals. In the center, a trapdoor, iron hinges, half buried in mud. Roy's face drained of color. "No," he said, backing away. "That's the old mine mouth. That's where they went when the hunger came." Eli moved forward. His voice was calm, like someone reciting a fact to keep from screaming. "If we find what's down there, maybe we find what happened to Clara." Mayfield, he knelt and brushed the mud from the handle. It was warm to the touch. From below came a faint vibration, almost musical. Leah caught it on the recorder, a note, steady and low, resonating like the mountain's heartbeat. The door opened with a sigh. The air that rose up was damp and warm, carrying the smell of iron, moss, and something sweet and rotten. Their flashlights caught glints of moisture on the walls, tiny crystals that pulsed faintly with their own light. Steps descended in a spiral carved straight into the stone. They went down together. Every footstep echoed too long, like the sound was reluctant to leave. The walls were carved with patterns, hands overlapping hands, circles within circles, faces drawn in crude lines that grew clearer the deeper they went. It wasn't coal they'd been mining here. It was memory. Halfway down, May whispered, "Do you hear that?" It wasn't the hum anymore. It was breathing. Slow, synchronized, hundreds of lungs drawing air in unison. She raised her light. The walls were covered in impressions, not carvings, prints, fingers pressed into the stone, as if the rock had once been soft and alive. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber. The space was enormous, hollowed out like the inside of a skull. Rusted tables, broken jars, and the faint shimmer of old lantern light reflected off something wet. The sound of water dripped from somewhere unseen, though there was no ceiling leak. And then they saw them. Figures lined the far wall, rows of people standing perfectly still, their skin pale, eyes closed, breathing in unison. Their clothes were old, threadbare. Some still had sheriff's badges, minor tags, or scraps of modern fabric. May's camera trembled in her hands. "They're alive," she breathed. "Oh God, they're alive." Roy stepped forward, trembling. "Not alive. Not dead either. The mountain keeps what it's fed." As Eli approached, one of the figures opened its eyes. They were white, like quartz. But deep inside, something flickered. Awareness, faint and ancient. Its mouth moved, slow and deliberate like stone cracking. "Hungry," it said. The chorus of breathing grew louder, 100 throats sighing at once. Leah dropped the recorder and backed away. But the sound only grew clearer, resolving into a chant, an old Appalachian hymn warped into something inhuman. "Come to the hollow, children of dust. Come where the hungry rest." The still figures began to sway, slow as trees in wind, and then, with a wet sound like bark peeling from wood, they started to move. Eli screamed for the light. The camera swung wildly, catching faces, limbs, movement that didn't look like walking, but like something remembering how to. He stumbled back up the stairs, breath ragged, May's hand slipping from his grip. She turned, light flickering, and saw Roy still frozen below, staring up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Go," he said. "You can't bring them sunlight. They don't want it." The last thing the camera captured, before the feed cut, was the trapdoor slamming shut from the inside. By dawn, only Leah made it back to the Ridge Road. Her clothes were torn, hands bleeding, voice gone. When she finally found a patrol station, she could only whisper one thing before collapsing. They weren't people anymore. The tapes sat forgotten in a cardboard evidence box for nearly 40 years, labeled unverified material. Raven Hollow, 1983. They gathered dust on a back shelf in the Harlan County Sheriff's Department, waiting for a pair of hands curious or foolish enough to wake them. Those hands belonged to David Holt, a state investigator brought in after a recent string of disappearances near the old mine country. He was young by mountain standards, mid-30s, still carrying the belief that reason could tame superstition. His first week on the job, he came across the file, 3 reels of tape, a damaged 16mm camera, and a folder of brittle notes signed by a Leah Voss. The label on the tape read, "They're not gone. They're just beneath." Holt played it on an old projector in the basement evidence room. The film hissed, grainy and colorless. Static filled the screen. And then, a trembling beam of flashlight, faces streaked with fear, the echo of distant singing. The footage ended abruptly, with the image of an iron door closing, and a voice whispering, "Don't let them out." He sat there long after the tape stopped, heart pounding, every hair on his arms raised. He'd seen plenty of rural crimes, moonshine wars, missing hikers, old feuds gone wrong. But this felt different. It felt ancient, like he'd stepped into a story older than his own bloodline. By morning, he was on the road to Raven Hollow. The locals didn't talk much. The few who still lived near the ridge kept their windows boarded and their yards ringed with salt lines. When Holt flashed his badge, they just stared past him, eyes glassy with the weight of unspoken things. At the diner in Pine Bend, an old waitress finally broke the silence. "You're not the first one to go looking," she said, setting down his coffee. "But you might be the last." Holt smiled politely, but her gaze didn't change. "They weren't bad folk, the McAllisters," she continued. "Just hungry." The mines shut down, the babies got sick, and the mountains stopped giving. Some say they made a deal to survive. Some say they became the deal. When Holt asked where the family lived, she pointed east, past the split in the road where the creek turns black. "You'll know it when you feel it. The birds don't fly there." The drive was short, but every mile felt longer than the last. The asphalt cracked, then vanished into gravel, then dirt. Trees arched overhead, knitting the road into a tunnel of shadow. The smell of the place changed too. Iron, mold, and something faintly sweet, like flowers blooming on a grave. At the end of the road, the forest opened into a clearing. There was nothing but stone foundations and an old well choked with weeds. Yet the air hummed faintly, that same pulse he'd heard on the film, vibrating just below hearing. He knelt beside the well, brushing aside moss. The stones were slick and warm. A rusted plaque leaned against it, nearly unreadable. "McAllister Homestead, Eastern 1859. God provides for his own." The deeper he looked, the darker the water seemed to get. He dropped a small stone in. No splash, no echo, just the sense that something down there had opened an eye. That night, Holt checked into the only motel in town, a single-story row of rooms, facing a dead gas station. The TV flickered with static no matter the channel. At midnight, his phone vibrated once, though he had no signal. The screen showed a single line of text before it went dark again. "Don't let them hear you." He stared at the phone for a long time, listening. And somewhere outside his window, beneath the hum of the crickets, he heard it again, the same faint lullaby from the tape rising from the woods, just low enough to make his heart forget how to beat in rhythm. The next morning dawned gray and heavy. Fog lay thick over Pine Bend like wool, soft but suffocating. David Holt left the motel before sunrise, driving toward the county, archives with 2 cups of burnt coffee and a question gnawing at the back of his mind. What kind of family makes a mountain remember its name? The Harlan County records. Office was an old brick building that smelled of dust and vinegar. Files were kept the way mountain people kept memories, buried, mislabeled, or forgotten on purpose. The clerk, a thin woman with silver hair and eyes like rain, looked uneasy when Holt mentioned the McAllisters. "Been a long time since anyone asked about that name," she said, flipping through microfilm reels. "Family came over from Rowan County around 1850. Coalwrights. Land grant, big settlement here. Then, something happened in '69. Records stopped cold." "What happened?" She hesitated. "Sheriff's fire," they said. "But the story's older than the fire, older than the mine. You ever heard of the Feast of Stone?" He shook his head. "They said it started after the mine collapsed, back when the mountain took 20 men in one breath. The McAllisters lost nearly all their kin that day. The preacher came, tried to bless the ground, but the mountain kept rumbling, wouldn't stay quiet. So the family fed it. She didn't say what they fed it, and Holt didn't ask. That afternoon, he drove out past the abandoned church she'd marked on his map. Its roof had caved in, and vines had swallowed the steeple. Inside, hymn books lay open on the pews, the pages fused together by damp. On the altar sat a tin box, half rusted through. Inside, a photograph, brittle with age. 12 people standing in front of a cabin, faces blurred by overexposure. On the back, written in faded ink, "The Feast, 1934. There was another note folded beneath it, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "We ate to live, but what we fed began to live through us." Holt slipped the paper into his notebook. He told himself it was evidence, not warning. Outside, the fog had thickened again, rolling low over the ground. A figure stood at the tree line, small, stooped, wrapped in a dark shawl. She didn't move until he spoke. "Ma'am, you live out here?" The woman's voice was soft and slow, the cadence of someone who'd learned English from the mountains themselves. "I've been waiting on you, Mr. Holt." He froze. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, showing too many teeth. "They tell me things. The ones down below." Her name was Ada McAllister, last of the bloodline. She lived in a cabin a mile from the church, surrounded by jars hanging from the trees, each filled with cloudy water and something pale floating inside. "They ain't dead," she said, leading him through the yard. "Just resting. Like the mountain between storms." The inside of her cabin was dim but orderly. Shelves of old family Bibles, mining ledgers, and jars labeled with names: Elijah, Ruth, Silas, Clara. The last one made Holt's skin crawl. Ada sat in her rocker by the stove, stirring something that smelled of iron and earth. "You come asking about the feast," she said. "Ain't much to tell. It started when the Lord stopped listening and the ground started answering." She told him of a winter when the snow buried their crops, and the children cried from hunger. The men prayed, but no food came. "The mountain," she said, spoke through the wind. "Feed me, and I'll feed you." "They thought it meant game," Ada whispered. "Deer, maybe a stray dog. But the mountain got a taste for sweeter meat." Holt swallowed hard. "You're saying they—" She cut him off, voice trembling. "We done what we had to. But when you feed a thing too long, it starts wanting more than what you can give. Starts asking for you." He stared at her, the weight of her words pressing like fog in his lungs. "And what about now? Does it still ask?" Ada's eyes lifted, unfocused, as if listening to something beneath the floorboards. "Every winter," she said softly. "And it's been hungry for near 40 years. Holt turned to leave, but before he stepped through the door, she said one last thing. "Tell your mother I'm sorry." He stopped cold. "My mother?" Ada smiled faintly. She was a McAllister too, wasn't she? "You got the eyes. You hear the mountain hum when it's quiet?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, back at the motel, Holt opened the notebook and stared at the note from the church. The handwriting was different now, sharper, like it had been freshly written. We ate to live, but what we fed is still hungry. He closed the book and pressed his palms to his ears. But the hum was already there, inside his head, deep and steady like blood moving through stone. The next morning broke without light. A low pressure hung over the valley, the kind that made birds fall silent and dogs hide beneath porches. Holt woke drenched in sweat, the echo of a dream still rattling behind his eyes. A long wooden table, faces without eyes, and a voice whispering through bone, "You belong to the mountain." He left Pine Bend before dawn, gravel crunching under the tires like teeth. He told himself he was just going back to verify Ada's story, to mark her cabin on record before his report. But deep down, he knew the drive wasn't for duty. It was compulsion. Something in the hum of the mountain had found a frequency that matched the rhythm of his own heart. When he reached the old church again, the fog was waiting, curled around the trees like smoke. The door stood open this time. Inside, every pew was overturned and the photograph from the altar was gone. In its place lay a single item on the floor, his mother's locket. The same one she'd been buried with 3 years ago. Holt froze, breath catching sharp in his throat. The metal was warm to the touch, as though it had been worn against skin. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. Not his mother's face, but his own, taken in the motel room the night before. Outside, something shifted in the fog. A voice drifted through it, gentle, almost maternal. "Come home, David." He turned, pulse hammering, and saw Ada standing at the edge of the clearing. But she looked younger now, her wrinkles softened, her hair thick and dark, her posture upright. She smiled. "It remembers you. Always remembers its own." Holt raised his gun, though the gesture felt foolish. "What are you?" he whispered. Ada tilted her head, almost curious. "Same as you. We're what's left when the mountain stops pretending to be still." The ground beneath his boots trembled, faint but rhythmic, like breathing through stone. Behind Ada, the fog began to take shape, tall, human silhouettes forming in the mist, their outlines flickering as though caught between flesh and vapor. One stepped forward. Its face was smooth where features should be, skin stretched pale and thin. When it opened its mouth, the hum became words. "Blood remembers. Blood returns." Holt stumbled backward, his mind fracturing between belief and denial. The figures multiplied, emerging in slow procession from the trees. Men, women, children, all pale, all breathing in unison. Some still wore miners' helmets crusted with dirt, others tattered Sunday clothes. Their eyes glowed faintly, milky white like quartz catching the last of the sun. Ada stepped closer. "You can't kill what's already been swallowed," she said softly. "The McAllisters didn't die down there, David. We just learned to listen." The hum deepened until it became pressure, pushing at his chest. Every heartbeat thudded in time with it. He realized the rhythm was no longer coming from the ground. It was coming from him. His hand shook as he aimed the gun, but the metal vibrated, like it wanted to slip free. "Stop!" he gasped. Ada smiled. "It's not me, child. It's home calling." Behind her, the faceless shapes began to kneel, pressing their palms against the soil. The ground pulsed with a dull red glow, as if the earth itself were alive, veins of molten light spreading like cracks through stone. From the fissures rose warmth, and the smell, copper and rot, sweet and unbearable. Holt fell to his knees, his ears filled with the hum until it became words inside his skull. "We fed it with fear. You'll feed it with blood." The ground opened beneath him. Not a clean split, but a slow, patient sinking, like the soil was softening just for him. He clawed at the roots, dirt filling his mouth. But the pull was gentle, almost tender, like a mother guiding a child to sleep. Ada's voice followed him down. "You see now, don't you?" It was never hunger. It was inheritance. Darkness swallowed him whole. For a moment, there was nothing, no air, no pain, no sound but the faint echo of breathing all around him. Then he saw them, faces half-formed in the rock, eyes blinking open one by one. They were inside the mountain, fused with it, living and unmoving, their chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. The last thing he saw before the dark claimed him was Ada's face, luminous in the black, her eyes burning with an impossible light. "The bloodline's whole again," she whispered. And the mountains fed. When the sheriff's team found Holt's car 3 days later, The doors were open and the keys still in the ignition. His badge was on the seat. No sign of struggle, no tracks, just the faint smell of iron and the soft hum of wind through the hollow, steady, pulsing, alive. The story of Raven Hollow should have ended in the 80s, with the lost film crew and the missing deputy, or at the very least, with David Holt's disappearance in 1983. But in the mountains, stories don't end. They sink. They lie waiting beneath rock and memory, rising again when someone foolish enough comes scratching at the surface. In the spring of 2025, Nora Bell, an independent journalist known for her Appalachian true crime podcast, Forgotten America, arrived in Harlan County chasing whispers of an unfinished case. She'd been following an odd trail, an unmarked evidence file that had been checked out of state archives, then quietly returned 6 months later, empty. The tag read, Holt, D., 1983, Raven Hollow. She had driven overnight, winding along the same switchbacks that once carried miners, preachers, and the doomed. Her rented SUV rattled over stones that looked suspiciously like old grave markers. By dawn, she'd reached Pine Bend, the town that time had given up on. The gas station was still there, though its pumps were rusted and the sign out front hung by a single chain. The same diner that had once served Holt still stood across the road. Nora stepped inside and found the same smell of grease and coffee thick with age. An old woman wiped the counter, a face that might have once been beautiful, now worn like weathered bark. "You here for him?" the woman said before Nora could speak. "Who?" "Your kin. The lawman who went missing. They say you look like him round the eyes." Nora froze. "David Holt was my uncle." The waitress didn't look surprised. "Then you best be careful. The mountain don't take kindly to ghosts coming back." Outside, a group of crows scattered from the roof in a violent flutter, as though something unseen had startled them. Nora's recorder picked up the sound, and beneath the wings, a faint tone, low and steady, humming in the same key that made her teeth ache. Later that day, she found what was left of Holt's motel. The sign was gone, windows smashed, ivy claiming the roof. Inside room 12, the wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. On the nightstand sat an old Bible, its pages fused together with some resinous substance. She tried to pry them apart, but the pages cracked and released a smell of metal and decay. In the margin of the first page, scrawled in fading pen, were words that made her stomach twist. "They hear you when you remember them." She spent the next 2 days combing through the forest around Raven Hollow. Most of the old road was gone, replaced by landslides and roots. The map on her phone was useless, the GPS pin spinning endlessly. Every now and then she'd hear the forest shift, small rustles, the occasional low groan like pressure moving through stone. On the third evening, just as dusk sank into the trees, she found the old church. Its roof was gone, the altar crushed under fallen beams, but the air was colder inside, the kind of cold that feels aware. Nora set up her recorder. "Day 3, Raven Hollow. I've located what I believe to be the same church visited by David Holt. In 83, inside, there are traces of fire damage but no animal sounds. The silence feels," she hesitated, "deliberate." She stopped recording when she noticed the carvings on the remaining wall. Not crosses, circles within circles, spiraling toward a single point. In the center, a single word etched over and over again in uneven hands. Beneath. Her flashlight flickered, and for a moment she thought she saw movement near the altar, a shadow pulling back, like someone stepping behind a curtain. She steadied her breathing. "Just wind," she told herself. But the trees outside weren't moving. As she turned to leave, something clattered on the stone, a rusted locket, identical to the one in Holt's file photo. She picked it up, fingers trembling. Inside was a picture of a man she'd never seen before. His eyes, though, were her own. She pocketed it and walked fast toward the car. The forest was too quiet. Her recorder, still running in her bag, captured the faintest sound following her footsteps. Not echo, not wind, but a second rhythm, breathing. When she played it back later that night, she realized the breathing wasn't behind her. It was underneath. The next morning came without birdsong. The forest around Nora's camp was still, its silence so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her tent, pitched at the edge of the ridge, overlooked the valley that locals refused to enter. Down below, the mist had pooled thick as milk. It wasn't fog, not really. It was too heavy, too intentional. It looked like something choosing not to rise. She brewed coffee over a small burner. The hiss of flame the only sound breaking the quiet. The locket from the night before sat on the table beside her notebook, the metal dark with tarnish. She hadn't opened it since she first saw the photo, but she couldn't stop looking at it. There was a faint vibration against her fingers, almost imperceptible, as though the metal itself had a pulse. By noon, she'd decided to follow the creek running north, tracing where old maps marked the McAllister tract. The forest closed tighter the deeper. She went, trees twisted into impossible shapes. Bark split with age, the air damp and mineral-rich. Once or twice, she thought she heard humming again, low and harmonic, weaving through the trunks like a voice singing through soil. She came upon it by accident, a patch of ground that sank slightly beneath her feet, soft and uneven. Moss covered a slab of iron large enough to be mistaken for a boulder. When she brushed it clean, she found hinges, welded shut and rusted deep. The trapdoor, the same one from Holt's notes. Her heart started to race. Every instinct screamed to leave it buried, but the journalist in her pressed forward. She cleared away the soil until the rusted ring handle emerged. It was warm to the touch, like skin. The crowbar took time. Every groan of metal sounded like the mountain complaining. And when the door finally shifted, the air that rose was not cold. It was humid, heavy with the scent of rot and something faintly sweet. Like fruit left too long in the sun. Nora gagged but held steady. She lowered her light into the darkness below. The beam cut through layers of dust, catching on wood and something that shimmered faintly. It wasn't stone. It was glass. Dozens of jars stacked neatly along the walls, each filled with cloudy fluid and shapes that seemed almost human. Her breath hitched. The ladder rungs were slick but sturdy. She descended 1, 2, 3 steps before her flashlight flickered. For a heartbeat, everything went dark. Then the light steadied again, and she realized she wasn't alone. At the bottom of the pit stood a wooden table. On it lay what looked like bones arranged into careful patterns. Spirals, circles, constellations. Beside them, a cracked film reel. She recognized the label before she read it. Raven Hollow footage, Reel 2, property of El Voss. Her recorder was still running as she whispered, "Oh my God!" When she touched the reel, the hum grew louder. The jars along the wall trembled slightly, the liquid inside rippling in time with the sound. The fog clung to her like wet fabric as Nora stumbled down the slope, lungs burning, the locket bouncing against her chest. The hum beneath the earth was louder now, vibrating through her ribs, deep enough to feel rather than hear. It wasn't sound anymore. It was language. The forest didn't look the same. The trees were wrong, taller, closer together. Their trunks slick with something that shimmered in the beam of her flashlight. Their roots bulged from the soil like veins, pulsing faintly. Every path she took folded back into another, a labyrinth grown from memory. "Just find the road," she whispered, though her voice shook. Her recorder was still running, the small red light blinking like a heartbeat in the dark. She wanted someone, anyone, to hear this. Even if it was after. Through the fog, she saw light. Not daylight, firelight, soft and flickering, moving slowly through the trees. Shapes walked with it, tall and deliberate, holding torches made of twisted roots that burned without smoke. The smell hit her next, copper and sweet ash. She crouched behind a fallen log, her breath shallow. The procession moved past her, silent except for the rhythm of bare feet on wet ground. Men, women, children, their faces pale, eyes blank, mouths open just enough to murmur something under their breath. Their skin glowed faintly, veins lit from within by that same red pulse she'd seen in the ground. At the center of the group walked Ada, her shawl dragging through the mud, her hand resting on the arm of something tall beside her. A man, or what used to be one, broad-shouldered. His skin stretched too tight, his face long and sharp. When he turned, the light caught his eyes, and Nora's breath hitched. She'd seen those eyes before, in the mirror, in old photographs, in every Holt family album. Uncle David. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling. He looked different, not aged, not dead, just rewritten. His gaze passed over her hiding place, and for a moment she thought he saw her. Then he turned back toward the procession, leading them down toward the hollow. Nora followed. The air grew heavier as the trees thinned and the ground began to slope downward. She saw it then, the clearing, wide and circular, the same one her uncle's report had described. At its center, the trapdoor she'd opened the day before now stood wide, spilling light from below. Dozens of figures gathered around it, their faces turned upward like worshippers. The light from beneath wasn't fire. It was molten, alive, pulsing like the inside of a living thing. Ada raised her hands. The crowd fell silent. The hum stopped. When she spoke, her voice carried easily through the still air. Once we fed the mountain to live. Now the mountain feeds through us. The ground trembled, a low, sustained growl rising from deep below. The torches flared brighter, and one by one the people began to step forward, kneeling at the edge of the pit. Ada leaned down and whispered to each of them, pressing her thumb to their foreheads. When she reached David, she smiled, her voice breaking. "You brought her home." Nora stumbled backward, her heel snapping a twig. Every head turned toward her. The silence that followed felt endless. Ada's voice was soft but carried clearly. "Blood remembers, child. You came all this way to finish what he couldn't." David stepped forward, eyes fixed on her. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice strangely calm. "It's not death down there. It's joining. You don't understand how heavy it is to be hungry forever." She backed away, shaking. "You're not him." He smiled faintly. "Not anymore." The ground behind her split with a muffled crack. Red light spilled through the fractures, bleeding across the clearing. The hum returned, deeper, more insistent, resonating through her chest until she thought her ribs would snap. The people began to chant, low and rhythmic. Ada stepped closer. "You can't fight it, Nora. It's in you, too. You've felt it, haven't you? The pull when the world goes quiet? That's the hollow calling home." Nora raised her flashlight, its beam trembling. "Stay away from me." Ada's expression softened with something almost like pity. "You can't run from what's beneath you." The earth moved. The pit widened with a groan, soil sliding inward like water into a drain. The figures didn't resist. One by one, they stepped into the light, dissolving as they descended. Their forms flickered, turning to silhouettes, then to nothing. David reached out a hand. "It's not the end," he said. "It's peace. The mountain doesn't take, it keeps." Nora turned and ran. The trees were alive now, branches twisting as she passed, roots snaring at her feet. The hum followed, chasing through the ground, matching her heartbeat. When she looked back, the clearing was gone, swallowed by fog and light. Only the sound remained. She didn't stop until she saw the road cracked and half-eaten by weeds. Her car waited where she'd left it, frost gathering on the windshield. She threw herself inside, slamming the door, shaking. The locket around her neck burned hot against her skin. As she started the engine, the radio flickered to life. Static filled the cabin, then a voice, faint, distorted, familiar. "Come home, Nora, the mountain misses you." She ripped the radio plug from the dash, breathing hard. The sound didn't stop. It was coming from the locket. She threw it out the window, watching it vanish into the fog. The hum faded at last. By the time she reached the next town, the sun was rising. She told herself she'd leave the story buried. She'd never publish the tapes. She'd never go back. But when she stopped at a gas station to fill the tank, the attendant, a boy no older than 20, looked up at her and smiled, the expression just a little too wide. "You got family up in Raven Hollow?" he asked. "You got the eyes for it." She didn't answer. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying a sound so low it could almost be mistaken for breathing. The recordings were never meant to reach anyone. Nora Bell had promised herself that. She'd packed them away, sealed the drives in a lead case, and mailed them to a storage unit in Lexington under a false name. She quit her podcast, moved west, and tried to forget the sound of breathing through soil. But hunger has a way of traveling. 6 months later, the tapes resurfaced. Online, an anonymous upload to a forum dedicated to forbidden field recordings. The files were labeled simply, Raven Hollows at Holt Archive at 1983 to 2025. Within hours, they spread like infection. Thousands of downloads, reaction videos, transcriptions. Most dismissed them as elaborate audio fiction, but some listeners swore the files changed. When played aloud, that if you turned the volume high enough, You could hear something breathing with you. It began small. A woman in Ohio claimed the hum from the recordings echoed through her basement walls at night. A trucker in Tennessee posted about a voice under the asphalt on Route 421. And in early winter, hikers near Harlan County reported low vibrations beneath the ground. Deep, steady, like the pulse of a buried engine. Nora saw it all unfold on a newsfeed she tried not to read. She was living in Seattle then, in a windowless apartment, her curtains drawn even during the day. She'd stopped sleeping through the night. When she dreamed, the mountain followed her. Endless tunnels lined with jars, faces floating inside, eyes open and waiting. One morning, she woke to find dirt on her bedroom floor, just a few grains near the window. She vacuumed it up, convincing herself it was nothing. But the next morning, there was more. And that night, when she turned off the lights, the hum returned, faint, pulsing through the walls, synced perfectly to her heartbeat. The next day, she received an email. No sender, no subject. Just an audio attachment titled feed1.mp3. Against every instinct, she played it. It began with silence. Then, faintly, a woman's voice. Distorted, almost kind. You can't leave the hollow, Nora. You can only carry it. Her own voice followed, whispering words she didn't remember recording. The mountain isn't a place. It's a hunger. It waits wherever it's remembered. The file ended with static, then a sound she'd come to dread. Slow, synchronized breathing. That evening, she called her friend at the Lexington storage facility. No answer. When she finally reached the regional manager the next morning, he sounded tired. Ma'am, that unit you mentioned, it's empty. Has been for months, whoever. Had it cleared it out themselves. You. Sure it was yours? She hung up without replying. By February, the reports had spread beyond Kentucky. News anchors joked about the Appalachian hum. Scientists blamed fracking, tectonic movement, geothermal vents, but the hum wasn't limited to the mountains anymore. It was spreading underground beneath cities, rivers, highways. Subtle at first, then unmistakable. In March, Nora started recording again. Not for a podcast, not for anyone. Just to document what was happening to her. Recording 1. The sound doesn't stop now, even when I leave the apartment. It follows in elevators, trains, crowds. The ground feels soft under my feet, like it's breathing. Recording 3. I heard my uncle's voice in the shower drain. He said they're moving west. He said the mountain's hungry again. Recording 5. I dreamed of Ada. She said it's not spreading. It's waking. The hollow was never one place. It was the whole spine of the land, sleeping under us. The recording stopped on April 3rd. When the landlord entered Nora's apartment 2 weeks later, the walls were covered in circles, hundreds of them, carved deep into the plaster, spiraling toward a single point above the bed. The floor was covered in dirt. The window was open, curtains fluttering, the air faintly humming. There was no sign of Nora, only her recorder still running. The last words on it were whispered, barely audible over the hum. I see them. Under the city now. The veins are open. The mountain's hungry again. They started calling it the Raven Hollow phenomenon. It sounded clinical enough to keep people calm, something to file under the strange but explainable. But no one could agree on what it actually was. At first, it was just the hum. Seismologists described a persistent subsonic vibration crossing state lines, strongest along the Appalachian belt. Then came the sinkholes. Whole stretches of forest folded in on themselves, trees vanishing like they'd been swallowed by air. Highways cracked open, asphalt curling upward. And from the fissures came the smell of iron and damp earth. News channels showed the same loop of footage for weeks. A stretch of I-75 bending like taffy. A church bell ringing from underground hours after the building collapsed. The faces of missing towns. Governments called it a natural disaster. Scientists argued about plate shifts, underground gas pockets, collapsing coal seams. But those who lived near the ridges said otherwise. They said it was breathing again. By summer, the hum had reached the coast. Ships reported it resonating through hulls, a heartbeat under the water. Divers claimed to hear voices in the deep, syllables that weren't human but carried meaning all the same. And then came the dreams. Across the country, people began to share the same night visions. Tunnels lined with glowing veins of red stone, faces half buried in rock, and a voice whispering the same phrase, "Feed it and be fed." In online forums, a movement grew around the recordings. Some saw them as prophecy, others as invitation. They called themselves the Hallowed. They believed the mountain wasn't a curse but evolution, that the earth was reclaiming what it made. Videos began to surface, gatherings at collapsed mines, people kneeling in silence, pressing their hands to the ground, whispering for the hum to answer. And sometimes it did. In one video, filmed near what had once been Raven Hollow, the soil rippled beneath a circle of believers. Their voices rose in low harmony, and the camera shook as if from distant thunder. When the frame steadied, the people were gone. Only the pattern of their footprints remained, burned into the earth. Governments blocked the footage. Platforms removed the tags. But deletion doesn't stop a sound. The hum began to seep into things. Recordings, power lines, even the ground itself. Cities built on concrete foundations started to vibrate faintly at night. Entire subway systems carried the pulse like blood through veins. In a bunker beneath the University of Tennessee, a team of geologists monitored the resonance. The readings didn't match any seismic event on record. The frequency was too consistent, too deliberate. One of the technicians kept a private log. "It's not coming from below," she wrote. "It's coming from within the rock itself. The stone is singing." By September, something new began, appearing along the Appalachian trail. Pale growths of mineral crusting the soil like frost. They pulsed faintly when touched, warm as flesh. Samples taken to labs decayed within hours, leaving only fine red dust that tasted of iron. And in that dust, under microscopes, researchers found what looked like cells. Living cells. They stopped publishing their findings after that. On the anniversary of Nora Bell's disappearance, a shortwave radio operator in Maine picked up a faint transmission. An old voice, calm and steady. He recorded it before the signal died. "This isn't the end of the world," the voice said. "It's the world remembering what it was before we came. The hunger isn't killing us. It's calling us home." No one ever traced the source. That autumn, the mountains glowed faintly at night. A dull red shimmer that moved under the surface like fireflies trapped in glass. Planes avoided the region. Satellites recorded static. And somewhere in that silence, if you listened closely, you could hear it. The same lullaby from the old tapes. Soft and patient, promising warmth. "Come to the hollow, children of dust. Come where the hungry rest." The hum spread west before winter. Winter came early that year. It rolled across the continent in silence. No storms, no lightning, no snow. Just a slow darkening of the sky, a stillness that settled like dust. Across towns and cities, power grids failed one by one, not from damage but from the earth itself, humming too loud for the lines to carry current. People stopped trying to explain it. There were no more news broadcasts, no internet updates, no last-ditch announcements. The hum drowned out everything, resonating through concrete and bone alike. The world didn't end in panic. It ended in quiet understanding. In those final weeks, survivors described the same things. Faint red light rising from cracks in the pavement, warmth seeping up through the soles of their feet, and voices whispering just beneath the sound of their own breath. Some fought it, barricaded doors, wrapped their homes in steel, buried themselves under layers of silence. But others walked willingly toward it, drawn by something older than fear. By January, most of the Appalachian Range glowed at night. Not fire, but the steady pulse of life returning to the stone. Forests bent inward like bowing worshippers. Rivers ran thick, slow, metallic. And beneath it all, the mountain sang. No one knows who made the last recording. It was found months later, drifting through an abandoned frequency. A transmission that carried farther than it should have, across dead air and broken circuits. The voice was faint but calm, recorded in a tone almost like prayer. "My name was Nora Bell. If anyone hears this, the hunger isn't ending the world, it's becoming it. The hollow was never a place. It was a seed. Every road, every city, every stone was part of it, waiting to wake. It's beautiful here. The air moves like breath. The light inside the ground feels like blood through skin. We are not dying. We are returning." There was a pause, then a soft laugh, quiet and exhausted. I saw David again. He said the mountain remembers all of us, not as lost souls, but as its children. We were never supposed to stand above it. We were supposed to go back inside. The recording ended with a sound that wasn't quite static. A low, rhythmic pulse, slowing like a heartbeat coming to rest. For years afterward, Those who still dared to travel east toward the Dead Mountains claimed they could see shapes moving under the rock at night, silhouettes walking in the glow, their outlines human, their faces calm. Some said they heard them singing softly, the same lullaby that once echoed through the hollow. And on quiet nights, when the wind stops and the ground hums faintly beneath your feet, if you listen long enough, you might still hear it. The breath of the mountain, steady and endless, whispering through stone and soil. Feed it and be fed.